Welcome to Living a Full Life podcast. Join us as we explore health topics that encourage raising healthy children, living a healthy life, and living the best life possible. Now, here's your host.
Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast of Living a Full Life. Special guest today, Dr. Christine Hafer,
Hi.
and I'm Dr. Enrico. We're going to keep diving into gut health. We started an introduction last week, and if you tuned in, you're probably a little excited about this week. We're going to go a little bit deeper into how to maintain a healthy gut relationship.
Yeah. So, you can do a lot of topics on gut health. You can get really deep into the microbiome and leaky gut and things like that. But I think just good basics on how to develop a good microbiome, a good gut health is a great way to start. We see a lot of kids in our practice. And what is that thing we have up in the office? It's easier to the tree.
It's easier to help younger kids, right?
Yeah, it's easier, as the twig bends, so does the tree, right? So it's easier to help when we have younger people, little people, versus doing a whole bunch of damage control when people are older. So when we talk about the gut, there's a lot of things that come to mind for people. Maybe symptoms, maybe the bacteria or the microbiome that's in our gut. And really, a lot of the research that we've seen talks about the microbiome. Sometimes it talks about the mucus layer that goes on top of that. It talks about, leaky gut is another thing that people have heard of. But when we think about gut health, I think that the microbiome is probably the most important. So it really comes down to what bacteria are growing in your gut. So in our gut, we have all sorts of bacteria. We have bacteria that should be there. The commensal or keystone bacteria are the most important. There's probably on the GI map that we do most often in our office, I think there's 12 or 13 that need to be there, and they need to be there in the right number. And so, the bacteria in our gut, we're not really good at breaking down food and creating nutrients or creating things like butyrate, which are gut healing things. You can think about like a tiger. What is it? A tiger only gets meat, right? They need vitamin C. Cats need a certain amount of vitamin C, but their microbiome has to produce that. So they have to have the right type of bacteria in their gut so that they can have the vitamins and the nutrients that come from their diet. So humans are omnivores. We eat all sorts of things. Of course, there's people that don't eat meat. And then there's people that carnivore that only eat meat. And, all sorts of diets in between. But really, it's just about feeding the microbiome. So we want to be eating a diverse amount of food that feed basically the bacteria in our gut more than we think about. We think about micronutrients and macronutrients a lot, but we need to think about the bacteria in our gut and how they're being fed or how they're being harmed. So, as far as diet goes, diet's probably the number one way to affect your microbiome. Things like toxins, glyphosate, Roundup, it's terrible. People use it all the time, but it harms our gut. It harms bacteria everywhere. It harms bees, right? It harms pretty much everybody. There's just certain things that we can't get away from in our environment that harm our gut. And really, there's a lot of emerging research on what all of those things are. So when we talk about developing a good gut, a good diverse diet seems to be probably the best way. And that means lots of different vegetables, lots of different fruits, protein. Protein, I think, is always critical. Of course, kids don't need as much protein as adults do, but they still need protein. It's very important for them. Grain, probably some grains are very helpful. Things like legumes, beans, lentils, certain types of nuts can be really helpful as well. So that's probably number one. Anything to add on that?
No, that was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about prebiotics and probiotics. So I think probably 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, it used to be common to just say, give everybody probiotics. Everybody should be eating yogurt. Everybody should be eating sauerkraut or taking probiotics every single day. And I think we used to recommend that as well too. Now we're starting to see with the microbiome testing that's always emerging, right? Like in our office, we use a GI map. There's a lot of debate about what are the best gut tests to use, but for patient use, it really comes down to cost, and then getting the most important tests in there. Where was I going with this? Probiotics. But what we are starting to find is when people are taking probiotics all the time, so like a probiotic supplement, not necessarily eating yogurt, not necessarily eating sauerkraut or other fermented foods, they're finding it was almost like force feeding certain bacteria. So, and they weren't necessarily those keystone bacteria. They were bacteria that should be there, but they need to be kept in check. So what we were finding is that was leading to intestinal overgrowth for some people. And anybody that's kind of in the gut health world knows that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is a big, big problem. So, taking probiotics after antibiotics or after you're sick is really helpful. But now we're finding taking prebiotics can be most helpful to when the good bacteria are there, or we want to encourage certain, especially commensal or keystone bacteria to grow. That can be really important. So prebiotics, we often think of things like inulin or fiber, probably even more important because some of the keystone bacteria that we know have to be in the gut for a good gut barrier so we don't develop leaky gut are things like Akkermansia, or I say these wrong all the time, the Roseburia, and there's another one as well. And so things that feed them, especially Akkermansia, we're really getting a lot of research on Akkermansia and how it really maintains the gut lining and the gut barrier and the mucus layer. Pomegranate, blueberries, cranberries. So there are prebiotics that specifically have those things. And probably Akkermansia gets best fueled with that. And so Akkermansia is one of those bacteria that it eats or it maintains the mucus layer, which feeds or kills off other bacteria. So it's one of those keystone bacteria that if it's not there, and in a lot of people with guts that, aren't developed enough or don't look healthy, that's a big problem. So it doesn't support the other bacteria in the gut.
Great. Yeah. How does this all relate to helping our kids at a young age start to develop a healthy gut, introducing these foods, as you were talking, I was thinking, picky eaters and not being able to get the right foods in there. How important now does prebiotics and probiotics become for our children? And when should we start really thinking about their gut?
Right. Yeah. Picky eaters is definitely a problem. And we have a kid who is on and off a picky eater. Right. And we're always working on, well, let's try this food. Let's try this. And now at 7, she was very picky. And now she's the one who's most open to trying things because we encouraged her to try things. But, like kids, for instance, on the spectrum, they're very picky. They're only eating white foods. They're only eating chicken nuggets and French fries. And yeah, definitely a supplement of, short-term probiotics and then maybe a long-term prebiotic supplement with, things that support Akkermansia, like the cranberries and the pomegranates, eating lots of fruit. Most kids are open to eating fruit. Most kids will eat blueberries. Most kids will eat, it's not the best thing in the world, but it's got some good enzymes. We'll eat pineapple, right? Our kids love pineapple. But fruits become really important there, especially for the most picky of eaters. And then, a prebiotic supplement. And, the other problem too with kids who are incredibly picky is they don't want to take supplements either. Mm-hmm. So it's always a battle, but I think that some of these battles are worth fighting, right? It's apparent you always have to pick your battles. What things do you want to put a line in the sand on, and what things do you fight sometimes, fight not other times, or you give up a fight on? But yeah, this would definitely be gut health is one of them for sure.
For sure.
When it comes to microbiome health, probably the best way for kids is to get that well-rounded diet. And when I say a well-rounded, healthy diet where kids are eating all sorts of things, and no kid is trying every single thing or enjoying every single thing, but the more diverse amount of foods that kids and adults are eating to, the more bacteria get fed, right? There are things that we don't even understand in food that are supporting or hurting certain bacteria. But when I talk about a well-rounded diet, so I want kids to eat, I want adults to eat as many things as possible too. That does not include highly ultra processed foods though. That's not sugary cereal. That's not Easter candy. We just got out of Easter. I'm not saying don't ever eat those things, but our gut needs to be healthy enough so that when it gets bombarded with these things, because we eat treats in our house too, that it basically can stand, the bullets, because I kind of think of sugar and processed foods and ultra processed foods as they're bullets to our gut. So if we have the healthy bacteria and then we have a little bit of bad food, of the ultra processed foods, then our gut can recover and it cannot get totally thrown off. But you do see, some people with candida issues or bacterial overgrowth issues, they just can't tolerate anything there. And people really work themselves into a hole when they start cutting out tons and tons of foods, and then they're left with, say, 10 foods. That's rough. It's a rough way to be. But yeah, when I talk about a diverse food and eating everything, that never includes ultra processed foods.
Right. We've come so long with the literature over the years. Our ancestors used to say, eat a wide variety of food, and they may have not known why or the science behind it. And the arguments that come up now is like, well, our soil is so depleted. When you eat an apple, you're not getting the same nutrition that you used to get 100 years ago. And those things may be true. But where the science is going now is almost like this, like catch-22 or a 180-degree turn of the table, where everyone's like, holy smokes, it's not even about that. It's not about the apple and the nutrition. It's about the vast array of food that you eat to supplement the bacteria in your microbiome to produce the things that you need to live a healthy life. It's the bacteria. The key to a healthy gut is the microbiome. So they need the variety of stuff. So when you eat leafy green vegetables, you're feeding a certain amount of bacteria. And it's that fermentation that happens through the digestive process that is the key. So I just really want you guys to be on the cutting edge of this and understand that it's not just the apple is not as nutritious as it was a long time ago, so don't eat the apple. It's not that. It's that the apple still supplies the bacteria that need. So there's certain bacteria that break down apples and fructose, and there's certain bacteria that break down triglycerides, and there's other ones that break down fatty acids, and there's other ones that certain things feed on certain things. There's some that only feed on methane or produce a byproduct of methane. It's unbelievable, this biome and where we're going with it. So it's super cool.
Yeah, and I think there's only more research. Like there's even more research on the virome, which is viruses, and how bacteria in our gut tend to live, in communities, kind of like we do as people. And then some bacteria are really good at walling off and sort of evading the ability for our body to really address them, see if they've overgrown, if there's not enough of them. And then there's this, the next interplay is how viruses live in those communities within the biofilms. That's a really interesting line of study, but I don't think we'll have a lot of good information on that for quite a while.
Not yet.
Yeah, as we're going, other things you can do. There is a lot of good research showing that regular exercise positively affects the gut and the microbiome specifically. So, it does a lot of different things, but probably the number one reason that exercise is so important is because it decreases the inflammation in our body. It gets our blood flowing. There's a million different things that exercise does. It lets endorphins go. It probably changes the way that our cells signal to one another. One of the things it does is it controls blood sugar. So blood sugar control is one of those things that has a huge effect on our body and everything in it, right? If you have too much sugar floating around in your system, you're naturally going to be more inflamed. You're going to have more inflammatory cytokines. And then when you start with inflammation in your body, it can just be an ongoing cycle, and you have to get something in there to stop the cycle. But exercise is one of those things that can help. So that's great. Stress, of course, stress affects everything. What doesn't stress affect? And I don't know a lot of the research on that, in the deep dives on that and how it affects everything. But people who have more stress have more pain in general, right? If we have more pain, it's generally a sign that we have more inflammatory cytokines. So, and then, there's the whole parasympathetic, sympathetic balance. Our nervous system balance is so important. So we're chiropractors, so we're going to have to talk about that, right? Polyvagal theory, vagus nerve, these are all things that are really hot button topics right now, because we're starting to understand how our nervous system controls so many things in our body, right? Nothing happens without the nervous system being in charge. Sleep, of course, sleep is important. This is always a tough discussion to have with young parents, because you're not getting sleep when you're a young parent and you're trying to develop healthy guts in your kids and in yourself, right? Moms are always trying to recover from having babies and feeding babies and not sleeping enough. So sleep is important. It's important that we prioritize sleep. We can talk about blue light and, getting UV exposure, things like that, but we probably have a podcast on that somewhere. Yeah. Antibiotics. You have to talk about antibiotics as well. When you take antibiotics, of course, hopefully you had an overgrowth of bacterial infection. It was affecting you. There's a lot of, information on that showing that we've really overused antibiotics for so long. And we use them way too easily. But if you did need an antibiotic and you took it, hopefully you got rid of that bacterial infection, but you have to consider that generally we're given broad spectrum antibiotics that don't just target one thing, right? They'll target maybe gram-negative, maybe gram-positive. Maybe they're a little bit better at targeting one specific type of bacteria. But when you target one bacteria, other ones get wiped out too. And it's the ones that we worry about most are the commensal and the keystone bacteria, because when they're not growing there in proper quantity, the bacteria in our guts like strep, staph, enterobacter, they're all necessary in our gut to a certain degree, but they are opportunistic bugs. So that means that when the other guys aren't there keeping them in check, they will go nuts. So it's important to do some probiotics after. It's important to really focus on gut health after. And I know you talked about in your last podcast, we used to say when you're on antibiotics, don't take probiotics. Now, even pharmacists are saying take probiotics in between your antibiotics because it'll best protect you. I think they're thinking more yeast overgrowth, right? But not everybody has a lot of extra yeast. Not everybody goes that way. But really what it does is it makes sure that the bacteria that are there at least getting some amount of support. And then you can, after you're done with the antibiotics, do a round of probiotics and then take your prebiotics. There's also a lot of stuff. So whey protein can be really helpful if you tolerate it, because it's got an IgG, I believe it's IgGI, which is something, it's from cow's protein or from cow's milk. So not everybody can tolerate it, but it's something that can heal up the gut lining as well and really support things.
Mm-hmm. Whey and bone broth and all that good stuff to help.
Yeah, we'll talk about bone broth more in the next. We're not just getting into how to develop a good microbiome when we talk about leaky gut. And when things go wrong, what do we do about them? But we're just talking about basics and how to make sure, our kids are off on the right.
Yeah, that's going to be the next one, leaky gut and some of the, when things go wrong, how we diagnose them and how to dive into, fixing things. This is how to maintain and try and live with a healthy gut. That's the thing that we're going through here. Anything else we missed?
I think that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. I mean, that was a lot there. If you were taking notes, you got a lot of little tips to help with, but it's the vast, I'm going to walk away from this podcast, like the vast array of food is what's going to keep the checks and balances going with your gut. And of course, avoiding the antibiotics, because every time you do that, you pretty much whitewash everything out. But that's really it. There is the array, and the emphasis of this podcast is just to get as much as you can, because fruits and vegetables even proteins, but fruits and vegetables in the gut ferment for a short amount of time. And it's that fermentation that feeds this whole process that science is just trying to figure out to explain. When we do biome tests and we get like 100 different bacteria, we know there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, that we still don't even know about. Mm-hmm. So we're focusing on what we know, which is very little. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're at so far with it. It doesn't mean to ignore the gut. It means it's the frontier to health. It's the future to health. This is it. This is where we're going to be going with everything about it. So, and we're keeping you up to date. There you go. So have a great week. Stay healthy, stay well, and catch us next week for the follow-up podcast on gut health.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Living a Full Life podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.